Welcome to this deep dive into the economic wisdom of Ludwig von Mises, specifically his book Economic Policy, Thoughts for Today and Tomorrow.
Right.
What's really fascinating is that this book, well, it isn't some abstract treatise. It's actually based on lectures he gave back in 1959 in Buenos Aires, of all places.
Yeah, and you have to picture the scene a bit. Argentina was facing some pretty significant economic turbulence. Lots of different socialist and, well, authoritarian ideas were gaining ground. So Mises, who was already this, major figure in the Austrian School of Economics, he felt this real urgency. He needed to lay out his understanding of sound economic principles.
Absolutely. And even though these were talks given, over 6 decades ago,
Yeah.
they were later put together and published as his book in '79.
By his wife and one of his students, I believe.
That's right. So our mission today is really to pull out the core insights from those lectures. We want to understand Mises' main arguments about how economies really work best and what role government should play, if any.
Think of it as a way to get to grips with some pretty enduring economic ideas.
Exactly. So to give you a clear roadmap, Mises structured these lectures around 6 key themes.
Yep, 6 main topics. He covered capitalism, socialism, interventionism, inflation, foreign investment, and then tied it all together with policies and ideas.
Okay, great. So we'll just work our way through those. Let's start with capitalism. Mises had a decidedly positive view, didn't he?
Very positive. He saw it as a system fundamentally driven by consumers, by what you and I actually want to buy.
That's his idea of consumer sovereignty.
Right, exactly. His core argument is that in a real capitalist system, businesses are basically scrambling to meet our desires. That's the only way they succeed.
So our spending decisions, they're like votes.
Precisely. They determine which businesses make it and which ones, well, don't. It's a constant process.
And Mises argues this drive to please the consumer is what fueled mass production and the big improvements in living standards.
He points to that striking example from England. Their population doubled between 1760 and 1830. He links that directly to the rise of capitalism.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting for me. He argues it wasn't just about stuff, but about social mobility too, creating opportunities that, just didn't exist before in those more rigid societies.
And I love the analogy he uses. He compares modern businesses, the successful ones, to historical monarchs.
Right, but with a twist.
Exactly. Unlike kings who inherited power, these economic leaders have to constantly earn their position by serving us, the consumers, effectively. It's like this ongoing election where our purchases decide who stays on top.
It's quite a different way of looking at corporate power.
Definitely democratizes it, in his view.
Though it's fair to say, even back then, Mises was aware of concerns about corporate influence. That's a conversation that's certainly still happening today.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so let's pivot now to socialism. Mises saw a pretty fundamental conflict here, didn't he? Between market freedom and socialism.
Yes, a complete clash. For him, it boiled down to individual liberty. In a market economy, you have, a huge range of choices, what job to do, what to buy. But under socialism, where the government directs the whole economic plan, that freedom, especially the freedom to choose your career, gets really restricted.
And he argued this central control just inevitably leads to inefficiency. A big part of that was the calculation problem, wasn't it?
That's central to his critique. Without a free market, without freely moving prices, how can planners possibly calculate the real costs and benefits? How do they know what's truly needed?
It's like trying to plan resource allocation in the dark. He really digs into this in his bigger work, Human Action, this impossibility of rational economic calculation under socialism.
Exactly. No real prices means no real signals about scarcity or demand. So the planners, they just lack the essential information to decide, how much steel is needed versus how much wheat, or where to build a factory.
Leading to waste and shortages.
Inevitably. And beyond the inefficiency, Mises argued that any system needing that kind of top-down control has to be authoritarian. It suppresses individual differences and needs coercion to make people fit the plan.
He really stresses that true freedom means being able to disagree, to engage with opposing ideas.
Right, not just freedom to toe the line.
And he saw socialism as fundamentally threatening that. Okay, let's move on to interventionism. This is where he looks at government sort of meddling in the market, right?
Yeah, things like price controls are a key target here. His argument is that these interventions directly undermine that consumer sovereignty we talked about earlier.
How so?
Well, when the government steps in and sets prices artificially, say, setting a maximum price for bread, it completely distorts the natural signals of supply and demand.
And he uses history to back this up. Those examples are quite stark.
They really are. Think about the Roman Emperor Diocletian trying to fix prices for everything.
Total disaster, right? Shortages everywhere.
Exactly. Or the price controls during the French Revolution. Mises argues they didn't solve anything. They just made things worse, leading to shortages, black markets, the usual problems.
So why do these interventions, which often sound good, backfire according to Mises?
Because they mess with the price signals. Prices in a free market convey vital information, what's scarce, what's abundant, what people actually want, interfere with those signals, and you create confusion and imbalances.
And unintended consequences.
Always. And Mises also warned about this tendency for interventionism to escalate.
The slippery slope idea.
Kind of. He argued that one intervention often creates new problems, which then leads to calls for more intervention to fix those new problems.
A snowball effect.
Exactly. Potentially leading all the way to full socialism. He pointed to things like Germany's Hindenburg Plan in World War I or Britain's wartime economy as examples of this dynamic.
So the bottom line for Mises on interventionism.
Keep it minimal. The government's main job should be security protecting property, enforcing contracts, not trying to manage the economy.
Which actually leads us quite nicely into the next topic, inflation.
Right. And Mises is very specific about the definition here.
It's not just prices going up.
No. For him, inflation is fundamentally an increase in the money supply. That increase then causes the purchasing power of each dollar or whatever currency to fall. Rising prices are the symptom, not the disease itself.
He uses historical examples again, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. From the flood of gold and silver into 16th century Europe.
To really catastrophic German hyperinflation in 1923.
Exactly. These examples really hammer home how destructive it can be when the money supply gets out of control.
And a key point he makes is that it doesn't hit everyone equally.
Absolutely not. It's uneven. Some people might benefit. Initially, he uses the example of munitions workers during a war. Maybe their wages go up first.
What?
But others, especially people on fixed incomes like teachers back then or pensioners, they get hammered because their income doesn't keep up as prices rise. Inflation acts like a hidden arbitrary tax and wealth redistribution.
And he wasn't a fan of Keynesian ideas about using a little inflation to boost employment.
Not at all. He was a staunch advocate for sound money. Balanced budgets, stable currency, that was the foundation for real, sustainable prosperity in his view.
Okay, let's shift to foreign investment. How did Mises see its role?
As absolutely crucial for economic development. He basically argued that the huge differences in living standards between countries boil down in large part to differences in the amount of capital available per person.
And foreign investment helps bridge that gap.
Precisely. It channels capital from where it's more abundant to where it's scarcer and can be used more productively. This boosts growth, creates jobs, raises living standards in the receiving country.
He points to historical examples again.
Yes, like the huge role British capital played in building railways all over the world in the 19th century, a massive engine for progress.
But he also saw the potential downsides or challenges.
Definitely. He was writing at a time when things like expropriation governments just seizing foreign assets were real concerns. He mentioned hostility towards foreign investors in places like India and Mexico back then.
So the investment needs a stable, welcoming environment.
For sure. But connecting it back, Mises saw capital accumulation, saving and investing, and the freedom to do that investing, both at home and abroad, as just fundamental for economic progress. Foreign investment is a key part of that engine.
Right. Okay, last lecture topic, policies and ideas. This feels like where he ties it all together.
It really is. Here he looks at what he saw as a kind of decline in constitutional government, or at least its principles.
And he links that to interventionism again.
Yeah, and the rise of pressure groups, special interests. He mentions things like the U.S. Silver Lobby or agricultural interests in his time, arguing they pushed for policies benefiting them, often at everyone else's expense.
Distorting policy away from the general good.
Exactly. And he even draws this parallel, which is pretty striking, with the Roman Empire.
The inflation in the 3rd century.
Yeah, he suggests that wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of deeply flawed policies driven by fundamentally unsound ideas about money and government power. Economic problems often stem from bad ideas taking root.
So his ultimate message here is about the importance of ideas.
Absolutely. The battle for economic freedom, for sound policy, is ultimately a battle of ideas. He argued you have to constantly challenge bad economic ideas and actively advocate for better ones, for market principles, for limited government.
It's a call to intellectual arms almost.
You could say that. Don't just let bad policies happen. Fight the ideas behind them.
So thinking about the impact, this book, Economic Policy, it seems to have had real staying power.
Oh, definitely. It's considered a cornerstone text in Austrian economics,
Yeah.
and it's just incredibly valuable for anyone wanting to understand the potential consequences, intended or not, of different economic policies.
And part of its appeal is its accessibility. Right.
Absolutely. He wrote it based on lectures for a general audience, not academic specialists, so it's clear, direct. It makes it great for students or just, curious readers. You don't need a PhD to get the gist.
And you can really see how his arguments, that strong defense of free markets, the skepticism about government intervention, how they still resonate with advocates of laissez-faire today.
For sure. But it also, naturally, sparks debate with those who see a much larger, more necessary role for government in the economy.
Which raises that really interesting question for anyone listening. How do these arguments Mises made decades ago about inflation, intervention, sound money, how do they connect with the economic debates we're having right now?
Yeah, his ideas are definitely still echoing in discussions about monetary policy, government spending, globalization, trade, all sorts of contemporary issues.
Now, just briefly, how was the book received critically? Was it all praise?
Mostly very positive, especially regarding its clarity. People really appreciate how he breaks down complex ideas. You see that a lot in reviews, like on Goodreads and places like that. Readers find it straightforward.
But there were criticisms.
Oh, sure. The main pushback is usually against his very strong, almost complete dismissal of government intervention. Critics argue that, well, sometimes interventions can work or are necessary and don't always lead down that slippery slope or totally wreck consumer choice.
So a debate that continues.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like the main contribution of economic policy is just this really clear, consistently argued case for free markets, for individual liberty in the economic sphere, and a strong warning about the potential dangers of too much government intervention.
I think that's fair. Even though they come from lectures in the late 50s, his insights still offer this powerful lens for looking at the economic challenges and questions we're still facing today.
Right. And on that note, maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about that tension we constantly see playing out, the push for individual economic freedom versus the calls for more government action to solve problems or achieve social goals.
Yeah.
What are the underlying ideas driving those different views? And how do you see that tension shaping the world around you right now?
It's definitely something we're thinking more about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.